Welcome to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, where our goal is to keep you informed, inspired, and a little entertained on all things diabetes. The information contained in this program is based on the experience and opinions of the Integrated Diabetes Services clinical team. Please discuss any changes to your treatment plan with your personal healthcare provider before implementing. Today's program is sponsored by Diamyd Medical, sponsors of the Diagnode-3 study. Welcome to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. I'm your host, Gary Scheiner. Today's topic is the quest for a cure. Have we found a diamyd in the rough?
Very
Pleased
clever.
to be joined by Ginger Vieira. Ginger's joined us at other times. Ginger, tell the folks at home a little bit about yourself.
Oh, I have lived with type 1 diabetes for quite a while, since 1999. And I've been writing books and articles and creating videos about diabetes for many years. But today I'm actually here on behalf of Diamyd Medical.
Okay, I like the 1999. So we could redo that Prince song. Had diabetes since 1999.
Sometimes I say 25 years, but that's not true next year, right? So I try to always say 1999. So
it gives practically writes itself.
It's perfect.
Well, you do more than just your work with Diamyd. You have your own podcast, the Diabetes Nerd.
Diabetes Nerd YouTube channel. I'm actually launching the Diabetes Nerd podcast next week. It's going to be, I call it high quality conversations with very low production. I'm going for the zero editing approach. It's going to be really laid back conversations with people I adore or admire.
Guaranteed you're going to sneeze right in the middle. It's going to happen.
I did one before this. I tell my guests, if you say something that you don't mean, that's on you. You're going to have to deal with it.
You're going to try your best to hold that sneeze in, and it's just going to explode.
Just be real. You sneeze on the podcast, and that's just how it's going to go.
That's fair.
Yeah.
When I first met you decades ago, I was impressed. You were a power lifter. You could squat a Buick back then, couldn't you?
Squat a Buick. I could squat 265. I could deadlift 300 pounds. That was my best deadlift, and I could bench 190. That was a different lifetime. I forget about it, honestly. I was about 30 pounds larger, as you recall, and was definitely at the beginning of my own diabetes self-education experimenting journey, for sure.
Yeah. You've done a lot with social media over the years and done consulting for a lot of companies. How did you latch on with Diamyd?
Diamyd was trying to do study recruitment, and they're trying to find the right candidates for their precision medicine therapy, which we can get into later. But Diamyd is doing something pretty innovative that no one else has done quite. There's a lot of companies out there trying to develop functional cures for type 1 or ways to prevent the full onset of type 1. Diamyd is doing is unlike anything any of these other biotechs have done.
Between us, we've been living with type 1 for 65 years.
All right. Wow.
And we've seen our share of miracle cures come and go. The most recent one, which has a lot of us a bit distressed, had to do with Vertex. They have a stem cell line that's cultivated. It's helped to develop insulin-producing beta cells, and their most recent research report showed that the cells just aren't working. I
want to correct that. It's not that the cells aren't working. Because VX-880, Vertex's clinical trial that uses immunosuppression, the cells are working there, but they're using immunosuppression drugs, which are not an ideal trade-off for you and me. In VX-264, the one that they snuck into a recent press release to say wasn't working, that one, what's not working is the device that was surgically implanted along with the cells to protect the cells without immunosuppression. So they've got to now go back to the drawing board. And I'm sure they've already got some ideas that, I'm sure they've been working on this, right? I'm curious to see what they come up with next. But they're trying, It's
tomato,
not.
tomato. You know,
No, no, it's not the cells. We have hope, I feel like.
we've had the ability to transplant beta cells for a long time, but you have to suppress the immune system, which leads to a lot of other health problems and complications. So we're no further along than we were. So the encapsulation part needs to
Yeah,
improve.
absolutely. The true protection part. And I mean, their VX-880 trial has like 11 out of 12 patients that are no longer taking insulin. I'm really hoping that they would partner with another company that has a therapy. There's one company in particular, SAB Bio, that I've learned a lot about. I would love it if SAB and Vertex would partner so that SAB's therapy can work to protect Vertex's cells. Because we know the cells produce insulin successfully. SAB's therapy tells the immune system, the specific part of the immune system that targets beta cells, to chill out. But that really,
I've got my own way of viewing a cure for type 1 diabetes. When I don't have to think about it anymore, or minimally have to think about it, then we're looking, and my glucose is managed, I consider that a cure. How do you define a cure for type 1?
I would say the same. It's that it takes care of itself. And I would be okay with having something surgically implanted or showing up once a year to get an injection, or even 3 times a year to get an injection, right? Of something that when I leave that clinic, I am not checking my blood sugar every day. I am not taking micro doses of insulin.
Yeah, I think about 2 areas. We have mechanical cures, artificial devices that can regulate glucose. Yeah, we're making progress with the current AID technologies, but we still got a ways to go with those. We still have to do a lot of the thinking for those systems.
Yeah.
And then we have the biological type cures, which involves islet cell transplantation, selective immunosuppression, even these concepts of smart insulin that activate only as they're needed.
Which it still seems like a fantasy, smart insulin. Nobody's really done that. They've been talking about that for 20 years.
Conceptual. Yeah. So where does Diamyd fit in that spectrum of cures?
Okay, so Diamyd's therapy is about precision medicine, which might sound like, oh, that just means it's a specific type of medicine for a specific disease. Well, that's nearly everything, right? This is actually, it boils all the way down to a certain gene that they have pinpointed that they know their therapy is most effective in people with type 1 who carry this specific gene. And we're getting a little, we'll explain this more, but 40% of people with type 1 carry this gene.
That was my next question.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's clearly a relatively common gene. And they have already been conducting clinical trials in Europe. And they're now at phase 3 of this current clinical trial. Diagnode-3 is the name of the clinical trial. So phase 3, for anybody who doesn't know, that means that they know their therapy is highly effective and safe, right? They've passed the phase 1 and phase 2 of a clinical trial. Phase 3 is where you're saying, okay, is this better than what's currently available? So that's where they're at. But in terms of that whole range, who it's for, it's not for people like you and me. We've lived with type 1 for too long. We don't have beta cells left to protect. This is for people who are newly diagnosed or in stage 1, 2, or 3. Currently, the Diagnode-3 trial is looking for people in stage 3 of type 1 diabetes.
So right now, it applies to recently diagnosed type 1s, or at least people who are at the point where their glucose is elevated, they require insulin to manage it.
There's a specific time frame. For the trial, they're looking for people who are diagnosed within the last 6 months. So
right. And so people diagnosed recently and have to start insulin treatment, but also have to have this specific gene sequence that would make the medication applicable to them. When I've learned about other research like this with other companies, is that if they figure out a way for this to work in this population, it can often be adapted to other populations, and it can be applied earlier in the course of development of type 1.
Yes. So
and most people don't realize that type 1 diabetes doesn't start when glucose levels go up.
Yeah, let's explain that, Gary, because a lot of people don't know there's different stages of diabetes.
Yeah.
Let's dig into that.
Yeah, I mean, stage 1 is the presence of antibodies. And there are 4, maybe 5 different antibodies that are precursors to the development of insulin requirement. But these antibodies, once they're present, then the chance of it progressing to the next steps is very high. And stage 2 is you've got the antibodies, and now your glucose levels are a bit abnormal. It's not so high that symptoms are appearing, but the glucose levels aren't perfectly managed the way they should be. And then stage 3 is when they do get excessively high, and we have to start treatment with insulin to manage it. So we don't diagnose type 1 anymore at the point where treatment's needed. We diagnose it when the antibodies are first detected.
Ideally, but another thing a lot of people still don't know is that these antibodies can develop years before you ever have symptoms and are officially diagnosed. And they know through TrialNet research that many people have antibodies present before they're even 5 years old. Even if you weren't diagnosed at, I was diagnosed at 13, that's when my symptoms developed. But had someone tested me back then, I most likely would have tested positive before I was even 5, which is why I've actually screened my kids multiple times before they were even 5.
Okay, I've screened mine as well. Now, for those who are not biochem majors, explain what antibodies are.
Yeah, so antibodies are basically the result of your immune system attacking and destroying some part of your body. So in type 1 diabetes, they know the specific, like you mentioned, specific antibodies, and they can actually test for them. And it's a simple blood test. Getting it isn't always as simple. You can't really just go to your doctor and ask for it. They haven't. I know Breakthrough T1D is working, developing just a panel that a doctor could look up and order for T1D screening. But kind of the best place right now to go get screened would be through TrialNet, Anodia if you live in Europe. TrialNet is working in Europe. And then there's a bunch of others through Barbara Davis Center, and askhealth.org is another one. But there's so much reluctance. I've seen so many people that you and I have known for years who don't want to screen their kids because, I'll know the symptoms. I don't need to worry about it, right? Like, what good is that? We don't want to have to just worry about that they're going to develop type 1. Well, there's something you can do about it, right? And you could potentially enroll your child in a clinical trial like Diagnode-3 with Diamyd, and there are others like it if you don't carry the gene. Yeah. So getting screened is so important. And if we can't even convince adults with type 1 to screen their children, how are you going to convince, families that aren't affected by type 1 at all?
Yeah. So antibodies can form in response to different aspects of the insulin production and secretion process. So I said there's 4, possibly 5 different antibodies that we look at, but one of them stands out. It seems to be an antibody that is most closely linked to progression to the next steps. Which antibody is that?
GAD.
Yep, GAD65. That's the one that seems to be the most evil of the autoantibodies, if you will. So what does Diamyd have to offer to counteract this GAD beast?
So let's go back in time a little bit. So the creator, the founder of Diamyd is Anders S. Mueller, and his daughter was diagnosed. They live in Sweden. Diagnosed at 10 years old. So this is a Swedish-born company. And whenever I hear the conspiracy theories that, they've already got a cure for type 1, they're just hiding it, right? So many of these companies and these therapies that are in clinical trials are developed by people who are very closely related to type 1 diabetes, and that is very true of Diamyd. He set out basically immediately and said, I want to try to do something about this. And that's when he discovered the GAD enzyme and that it wasn't really being used in any other research around type 1 diabetes and developing a functional cure or prevention. So GAD is an enzyme in the body that plays a major role in producing insulin, and the immune system, like you said, is attacking and destroying that GAD enzyme. So GAD autoantibodies are something that can be measured. GAD65, Diamyd's therapy. Oh, I'm sorry, Barbara, because it's a bumpy sentence. So GAD65, Diamyd, actually talks to your immune system and says, hey, stop attacking the GAD enzymes, stop attacking the beta cells. And it's not an immunosuppression drug, right? It's not like putting you at risk of catching a cold and getting, it's not changing how your immune system protects you. It's an immune modulator. So it's just changing specifically how your immune system is reacting to your beta cells.
It's targeting a specific antibody. It's not causing widespread suppression of the body's immune system. It's just really focusing on the one specific one that most likely leads to progression and development or progression of type 1 diabetes. I guess that's what you meant by precision medicine.
Well, the precision part is also the gene factor. So in Diamyd's case, the precision therapy is speaking directly to people with this certain type of gene. They know this medicine works precisely in, right? And there's a lot of cancer treatments that are the same way. They've figured out that people with breast cancer who have a certain gene respond better to some treatments than others.
I think of it kind of like laser treatment for retinopathy now. It used to be if you had hemorrhages in the back of the eye, there wasn't much they could do. Anything they tried to do would destroy areas of the retina that it shouldn't. But now with lasers, we can pinpoint those blood vessels that are damaged, seal them up without damaging the tissues around it. In this case, you're able to take this Diamyd drug and target the specific autoantibody that is damaging beta cells and just keep that one from causing the damage without affecting other aspects of the immune system. Widespread immune suppression causes a lot of issues. Can you detail some of the problems that we see with widespread immune suppression?
I would rather you detail that, Gary. I can't speak to those specifically. I know it doesn't sound good.
It's not. I mean, it opens us up to all kinds of infections. It's hard for the body to fight viral and bacterial infections when the immune system is impaired on a large scale. And there are a lot of side effects involving oral health and a lot of other parts, body functions that we tend to have issues with widespread immune suppression. So this targeted therapy seems to make a lot more sense.
It's critical
than what we've had in the past.
And I hear from people whenever I post anything about diabetes cure research, I always hear from people saying, well, why can't we have XYZ? Like VX880, for example, requires immunosuppression, which makes it very undesirable for a significant percentage of the population with type 1, right? It's really intended only for people who are struggling to get through their day and function. And to explain like, hey, you really don't want to be on immunosuppression drugs for the rest of your life. Even though type 1 is so hard, the trade-off is not worth it.
That's it. It's a trade-off. And for the vast majority of people with type 1, widespread immune suppression is not worth the trade-off.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for detailing that.
And now a word from our sponsor. If you were diagnosed with T1D in the past 6 months and are between ages 12 and 29, here's a clinical trial you might want to consider. GAD65 from Diamyd Medical teaches your immune system to stop attacking your pancreas's beta cells. Diamyd is currently recruiting study participants in the US and Europe. Visit Diagnode-3.com or email clinicaltrials@diamyd.com to learn and see if you qualify. And now back to our program. So what exactly is the screening process? So if somebody either has recently diagnosed type 1, knows somebody recently diagnosed, what's the screening process to see if they qualify for this drug?
So the first thing is age range. So they're looking for people between the ages of 12 up to 29 years old. And then you've been diagnosed within the last 6 months. And then the first step after you've reached out through it's Diagnode-3.com. After you've reached out, the next thing they're going to ask you to do is a blood test to see if you carry this gene. And if you don't carry the gene, you don't qualify to participate. And that makes it a little harder for Diamyd to find participants, right? Because they're looking for people who are just diagnosed and who carry this gene. And many people who are diagnosed within the last 6 months, they're just still overwhelmed by this new diagnosis. It's like they're not thinking about clinical trials. That's a really big step, especially if you're someone who's never really had to be involved in the medical system. Now you're going to go participate in a clinical trial. That can be daunting. So it is a hard recruitment effort because it's such a specific population.
What's in it for someone who receives the treatment? Let's say it works, it's beautiful. And how does somebody benefit from receiving?
So what Diamyd's therapy aims to do is prevent or delay or significantly reduce your need for exogenous insulin from a vial, from a pen, right? Versus endogenous inside your body. So if someone is diagnosed in the last 6 months, like you said earlier, they're already taking insulin, but Diamyd's therapy hopes to significantly change how much insulin they actually are going to need every day and potentially even delay the progression, because we don't realize it. If you think back, you're not going to remember how much insulin were you on in the first 6 months when you were diagnosed. And many people are still in the honeymoon phase, right? So Diamyd's therapy hopes to prolong that honeymoon phase where your pancreas is still producing enough insulin to keep your need for injections relatively low, right? And it makes it a lot harder to have super highs when you're in that honeymoon phase. I remember when I was in the honeymoon phase, there was 2 of us in my school. We had to go to the nurse's office and prick our fingers there and then determine what we were going to take for insulin with the nurse's approval, right? And I was only a few months in, and there was a girl there who lived with type 1 for years and years. And I remember seeing on her meter like a 225 blood sugar level and being like, because I hadn't seen that yet because my pancreas was still helping me so much, right?
You were honeymoon girl.
Yeah. I was living my best T1D life with the pancreas still helping out. So Diamyd's therapy really aims to prolong that honeymoon phase. And
that is such an important thing. And any family with type 1 knows how wonderful the honeymoon phase is. I have enough patients I've seen where if someone's producing just even the tiniest bit of their own insulin, it provides this beautiful buffer. Glucoses don't get to extreme highs or lows because the pancreas can make adjustments to keep things from getting too far out of range. So you can almost do no wrong. Even if you take the wrong dose, eat a lot, whatever, it doesn't really cause extreme highs or lows.
Those families, they don't. So you were saying how much they appreciate the honeymoon phase, but can they appreciate it when they're in it, or is it only after looking back?
Usually afterwards.
Yeah, because they don't even know what's coming. Yeah,
I try to show them graphs of mine or someone else's glucose bouncing around. They realize, oh my goodness, this is what I'm headed for.
Yeah,
I didn't get a honeymoon because when I was diagnosed, I had already gone about 3 or 4 months of peeing my brains out, losing weight, all the symptoms. So by the time I was diagnosed, my beta cells were dead on arrival. I had no insulin production left at all. And I see this now with patients. Once they lose all their insulin production, blood sugar control is 1,000 times more difficult. So preserving the honeymoon has so much value. It makes living with diabetes much easier. And it also helps improve long-term outcomes because if you manage your glucose well for many years, your risk for complications goes down and your daily quality of life is that much better.
Yeah. And so another thing to think about when you're considering a clinical trial is in many clinical trials, it's 50-50 of who gets the placebo and who gets the actual therapy. And in Diamyd's trial, there's a 30-70 split. So 30% are getting a placebo, which is basically like, they're giving you a pretend. It's like, might as well inject you with saline instead of the therapy, right? And then 70% are actually getting GAD65, the investigational therapy. So that's a big deal. It means that you've got a really good chance of getting the treatment. It's, can't help but
Yeah,
be
but even if you
frustrating.
don't, you're
Yeah.
contributing to some very important
Contributing to
research.
groundbreaking research. Absolutely.
You're familiar with Tzield,
Yes.
Sanofi's drug. Teplizumab is the generic name. What are some of the differences between Diamyd's treatment and something like Tzield? Because Tzield, Sanofi's already studying it in phase 3, when somebody's recently diagnosed. So
Yes.
what are some of the differences?
So, one of the first biggest differences is how it's administered. Tzield, I think, is a 10-day infusion process. So you have to
2 week.
14 days, full 14. You have to show up every day for 14 days, which means mom and dad are taking off from work. You're missing school, potentially traveling somewhere, right? You're paying for all that. And I want to remind me to mention that with Diamyd's. In Diamyd's clinical trial, it's 3 injections, not some big to do. You're not sitting there for 3 days. And they're 3 injections over the course of 3 months. And the injection is in a vein in your groin, which sounds a little scary, but it feels no different than getting your blood drawn, right? It's not
squirming in my chair here.
No squirming, Gary, no squirming. It is really no different than getting a blood draw from a vein in your arm. And they just know that is the most effective spot to introduce their therapy.
So 3 monthly injections.
Yeah. So 3-month process with 1 injection per month. And here's the cool thing. If you don't live near one of the clinical trial sites, they will pay for your travel to get you there. And their trial there's a whole bunch of cities across the US. You can find all those cities listed at Diagnode-3.com. And then multiple countries in Europe are also recruiting. So they're really trying to make it as easy for the participant to get involved as possible. Yeah.
So once the injections begin, is there additional care that's provided or treatment that's applied?
Then there's monitoring and basically looking at blood glucose levels and C-peptide levels to measure. If for anyone listening, C-peptide is an indication of how much insulin you're producing. I recently had, funny story for you, I have a new endocrinologist. I don't really go to an endocrinologist for like ongoing support, right? I have Gary Scheiner in my back pocket. If I have a real insulin question, I can call Gary, right? Or Jenny, who's on your team, I'm good friends with. My endocrinologist writes prescriptions for me. And she was like, "Oh, you only taking this much long-acting insulin? You must still be producing insulin." I was like, "Well, I've lived with type 1 for 25 years. I highly doubt I'm still producing insulin." She insisted. She made me pay for a C-peptide test, and it said I was producing less than 0.01 my peptide level. Sorry. Yeah. So I basically am producing no insulin. So Diamyd's clinical trial, it will measure your C-peptide level, which indicates how much insulin you're still producing. And if their therapy is effective, your insulin production should sustain, your C-peptide level should sustain.
So when somebody makes their own insulin, when the pancreas puts out insulin, we also get this little molecule called a C-peptide. And they only call it that because it's shaped like a C. It's very scientific. And when we inject or pump insulin, it doesn't have that C-peptide part. So that's how we know how much insulin your body's making as opposed to how much you're taking. So the C-peptide is sort of a surrogate measure of how much insulin the body is making on its own. So yeah, that's an important part of the follow-up as well. What kind of outcome measurements are the study personnel collecting? Are they looking at how much insulin someone requires? Are they looking at C-peptide, glucose management?
It's primarily C-peptide and blood sugar levels and A1C. So there is that follow-up period, and you're contributing to an incredible, hopeful breakthrough in research that could, I just imagine, like, if another really cool thing about GAD65, this therapy, is that it really has no significant adverse effects. You can't say no side effects of any medication, but its safety profile is considered remarkable by the whole scientific, that's the language I'd use, a remarkable safety profile, right? Which is a good thing. And if my children were to develop type 1 and I missed the opportunity to enroll them in a trial like this, I would be so bummed, because it is like you described, the honeymoon phase. I mean, imagine my 7-year-old, she's a wild maniac. I do not want to manage insulin doses and carb intake in a child that knows how to sneak over to the chocolate bowl. And my other kid's favorite new snack lately is pretzels and Nutella. If I can have their pancreas help them through pretzels and Nutella, I would not want to miss that opportunity. So it really starts with screening, getting your kids screened.
Absolutely. And it applies to adults too. It's not just kids.
No.
Adults who, they enjoy the honeymoon and they benefit from that honeymoon equally as much as kids do.
Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned that if somebody doesn't live near one of the test sites, you said there's 13 across the US and several in Europe as well, that Diamyd as a company will pay for their travel to receive their treatments.
They will.
So that would be like once a month for 3 months.
So you're committing to traveling to that clinic site 3 times, and then at some point down the road, 6 months to a year, a follow-up appointment.
Okay. Yeah. A lot of the other data, the sensor data, insulin data, that can be collected on a virtual remote basis, I imagine.
Believe so.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, that was mainly what I wanted to learn about this. I mean, this is exciting. It's just a matter of getting the word out, I guess, and letting clinicians know if you got newly diagnosed patients, because we got a lot of clinicians who listen to this podcast, and I want them to know you got newly diagnosed patients, age 12 to 29. Consider them for this.
Yes.
This is a great opportunity to do well by them. If you can prolong their honeymoon indefinitely, they're going to they should appreciate that to no end.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine? I just can't even imagine. I've had a couple families, parents reach out to me on like private messages on Instagram saying, hey, my child was just diagnosed last month, and I see that you do a lot of stuff on research. Is there anything they can enroll in? And I've introduced those families to the DRI, the Diabetes Research Institute, which works closely with Diamyd and many other companies trying to develop cures and treatments for type 1. DRI can support that family. They are actively right now supporting that family to find a clinical trial and see, if you don't qualify for Diamyd's clinical trial, there are others. I mean, clinicians listening, oh my gosh, please encourage your patients to pursue this, because it's just crazy not to.
Yeah, that applies to both pediatric and adult patients, because this goes up to age 29. Guessing that, once this study is completed, they're going to start looking at similar outcomes in younger kids and in older adults, and maybe start looking beyond the 6-month time interval. So it'll end up, like I said, they'll be able to extrapolate this to a lot more people eventually, but this is a very important starting point.
Yeah. And they're a very small company. They're really only 30 people. This is not big pharma. This is a really small company that started, the heart of it is Anders and his daughter, who's an adult now, but they're determined to find a therapy that's life-changing.
That's how things happen. Necessity is the mother of invention, right? This is how, the islet or the Beta Bionics got started. Said Damiano's child had diabetes. This is how all the open source, the loop systems and all got started. Parents got tired of waiting for good tech for their kids. So they
Vertex, Vertex bought Sema. Doug Melton's son was diagnosed at like 6 months old. So yeah, it all starts really at the heart of having known this disease up close.
So Diamyd this is exciting stuff. Right now they're looking for research participants between ages of 12 and 29 who are recently diagnosed and started treatment for type 1 diabetes. It involves and they also have to have that specific gene. And almost half of new diagnoses have this specific gene that helps ensure that the Diamyd medication, is going to be effective for them.
And Diamyd will test you for that gene. I've had people say, well, how do I know? And I'm like, well, you call them up. Clinical trials at Diamyd.com is their email. You get involved and that's the very first thing they'll do is see if you carry that gene.
Yeah, our show notes will have all of the contact information people can look for. But the basic info, Diagnode-3.com. They can go and learn pretty much everything we covered today at that site. And I strongly encourage people to do so. And healthcare providers encourage your patients to do so as well. So, Ginger, thank you so much. Someday I got to get you to my gym. You got to teach me how to work. My deadlift is lagging. I've got to build up. I think women have some extra back muscles that men don't have.
Oh, that must be it. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've known there's a couple people on my team, like Anna, our social worker. She can deadlift more than I can also, and I'm like,
deadlift
what am I
was
missing?
my favorite. That was my favorite. And the little details in the technique of how you're standing and how you're grabbing the bar and where you put your weight in your feet and what you do with your arms and your shoulders and your lats before you lift that bar. I love those little details.
Yeah, I got some things to learn from you. That's for sure.
It's about time, Gary.
Yeah. And you just published second edition of your book on type 1 diabetes and pregnancy.
Yes, we're super excited about that. It's got all new sections all about AID pumping during pregnancy. And yeah, it was overdue. Jenny and I were both about to give birth to our second children before we published the first edition. We were like, oh my gosh, get this out because we'll never get this book done if we don't get it out before these children are born.
That's right. Yeah, your kids are about the same age.
Yeah, they are.
All right. Well, again, thank you, Ginger. I encourage people to look for the information about Diagnode-3. Thank you so much. I'm Gary Scheiner. Thank you for listening, and I want to remind everyone to keep thinking like a pancreas. Thanks for tuning in to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast is brought to you by Integrated Diabetes Services, where experience meets expertise, passion meets compassion, and diabetes care is personal because we live it too. Our team of clinicians, all living with type 1 diabetes, understands the challenges firsthand. We're here to help no matter where you are in the world. From glucose management to self-care strategies, the latest tech, sports and exercise, weight loss, type 1 pregnancy, and emotional well-being, we've got you covered. We offer consultations in English and Spanish via phone, video chat, email, and text. Want to learn more? Visit integrateddiabetes.com or email info@integrateddiabetes.com to schedule a consultation. On behalf of Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, I'm Gary Scheiner, wishing you a fantastic week ahead. And don't forget to think like a pancreas.